She slid the folder across my kitchen table like she was doing me a favor. Just sign it, Dad. It's better for everyone. I looked at my daughter-in-law, Pamela, sitting in the chair where my wife used to drink her morning coffee. I looked at my son, Gregory, standing by the window with his arms crossed, not meeting my eyes. And I looked at the folder, thick, legal, final, sitting between us like a grenade with the pin already pulled. I did not pick up the pen. I was 67 years old. My name is Walt Mercer, and for 38 years I had built something from nothing. Not a corporation, not an empire. A chain of 11 diners across eastern Tennessee and western North Carolina, each one named after my late wife, each one with her photograph near the register, each one built on the same philosophy she taught me on our first date over bad coffee and good pie. Treat every person who walks through that door like they drove 2 hours just to see you. Margaret died 14 months before that morning. Ovarian cancer. 7 months from diagnosis to the end. She was 61. She never got to see the 11th location open. And now Pamela was sitting in her chair, pushing a folder at me, telling me to sign. I am going to tell you everything that happened next, friends. And I want you to stay with me, because what I am about to share is not just a story about a business. It is about what happens when the people you trusted most decide that your grief makes you weak. It is about what they never counted on. And it is about the kind of truth that, once it comes out, cannot be pushed back into the dark no matter how badly someone wants it to stay there. Let me take you back to where this really began. Margaret and I opened the first Maggie's Kitchen in 1987 in Kingsport, Tennessee. We had $11,000, a leased building that smelled like mildew and old grease, and no idea what we were doing. What we had was Margaret's mother's recipes, my willingness to be the first one in and the last one out every single day, and a belief that people in our county were hungry for something that felt like home. By our 5th year, we had 3 locations. By our 15th, we had 7. The food never changed: chicken and dumplings, biscuits that came out of the oven every 45 minutes, coffee that was always fresh and never charged for a refill. The walls were always warm yellow. The booths were always clean. The staff stayed because we paid them fairly and treated them like family. The real family was another story. Gregory was our only child. A good boy when he was young, curious, kind, a little too easily led by whoever he was standing next to. He married Pamela 9 years ago. She was sharp and organized, and I had respected those qualities early on. I had even brought her into the business in an administrative role 5 years back when she said she wanted to help. I gave her access to the books, the vendor contracts, the payroll system. I trusted her because she was Gregory's wife, and Gregory was my son. That was my first mistake. Margaret's illness changed the dynamic in ways I was too exhausted to see clearly at the time. Pamela began asking more questions about the business. What was the valuation? Had I spoken to an estate attorney? What were my plans for the locations if something happened to me? I answered her questions because I thought she was worried about the family's security. I answered her because I was spending most of my energy sitting in a hospital room holding my wife's hand, and I did not have the capacity to be suspicious of the woman making sure there was food in my refrigerator. After Margaret passed, the questions got more specific. Had I updated my will? Did Gregory have signing authority on the business accounts? What was the revenue on the Asheville location specifically? Why was the Johnson City store still in my personal name and not under the LLC umbrella? I told her I would handle things when I was ready. She said she was only trying to help. I believed her. Then, 11 months after Margaret died, I had what my doctor called a cardiac event. It was not a heart attack. It was a warning irregular rhythm. 2 days in the hospital, a new medication, a recommendation to reduce stress. The doctor used the word manageable 4 times in one conversation. I was fine, but Pamela heard something different. She heard opportunity. Within 3 weeks of my discharge, she had consulted a business attorney. I did not know this yet. Within 5 weeks, she had drafted a management transfer agreement, a document that, if signed, would give Gregory operational control of all 11 Mercer Group locations, including the right to negotiate sales, enter new contracts, and restructure the business entity. Within 6 weeks, she sat down at my kitchen table in my wife's chair and pushed that folder toward me. Just sign it, Dad. It's better for everyone. I looked at the document. I recognized the structure. I had been in business long enough to know what a management transfer looked like. I also recognized what it actually meant. Signing it would not just give Gregory administrative help. It would functionally remove me from any meaningful decision-making authority over everything I had spent 38 years building. I closed the folder. I told them I needed time to review it with my own attorney. Pamela said there was no urgency, said she understood, smiled the smile of someone who had already decided the outcome. Gregory said nothing. He was still looking out the window. They left. I sat at that table for a long time. Then I called a man named Dennis Faulkner. Dennis had been my general manager for 22 years. He started as a line cook at the Kingsport location when he was 24, worked his way to shift lead, then assistant manager, then the best GM I had ever seen. He knew every vendor, every employee, every quirk of every building. He also knew Margaret. She had been the one who told me, 12 years ago, "Walt, that young man has your work ethic and her mother's instincts. You'd better keep him or someone smarter than you will." I kept him. I told Dennis everything. He listened without interrupting, which was something he had always been good at. When I finished, there was a pause. "How long do you think this has been in the works?" he asked. I told him I did not know. Maybe months, maybe longer. "Then we need to move faster than they're expecting," he said. What I did not tell Pamela, and what Gregory likely did not know, was that 3 years earlier, before Margaret got sick, before any of this, I had sat with my estate attorney and restructured the ownership of the Mercer Group. The flagship Kingsport location, the original one, was placed into a family trust. That trust had 2 named beneficiaries, myself and Dennis Faulkner, in recognition of his 20 years of partnership. It was not a gift. It was a protection, a way of ensuring that the heart of what Margaret and I built could not be sold, dissolved, or transferred without both of our agreement. Pamela's document, even if I signed it, could not touch the Kingsport store. She did not know this, but I had also started to notice something else, something that had nothing to do with the business. Over the past several months, Pamela had been spending considerable time with a man she described as a business consultant. His name came up in passing conversations, David, just David, and Gregory seemed unbothered by his presence in a way that felt strange. He had reportedly helped Pamela identify investment opportunities and had been advising her on the restaurant industry specifically. I asked Dennis if he knew anything about a consultant named David who had been approaching Pamela. Dennis was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Walt, I need to show you something." He came to my house that evening with a manila envelope. Inside were printed copies of emails forwarded to him by a vendor contact who had grown uncomfortable and wanted no part of whatever was happening. The emails were between Pamela and a man named David Kress. In the emails, Pamela referred to the Mercer Group locations as the acquisition target. She discussed a timeline. She discussed what the 11 locations would sell for on the open market. She had already had them, informally valued at somewhere between $4 and $6 million. And she referred to me, her father-in-law, as the holdout, not by name. As the holdout, David Kress, according to a quick search Dennis had done before coming over, was a restaurant industry broker with a history of distressed acquisitions. He bought struggling businesses cheap and flipped them. What made him interesting, beyond his professional history, was something Dennis found in a state business registration database. David Kress had a registered business partner in 2 of his prior acquisitions. That partner's name was Pamela Forsyth Kress. Her maiden name. Pamela and David Kress had been business partners in 2 prior restaurant acquisitions before she ever married Gregory. She had never mentioned this to me, not once in 9 years. She had presented herself to our family as someone with a background in marketing and administration. The partnership records showed something else entirely, a pattern of identifying family-owned restaurant businesses whose founding owners were aging, approaching them during vulnerable transitions, and facilitating sales that benefited the acquisition side far more than the sellers. I sat with that information for 2 days. I did not sleep much. I want to be honest with you, friends. There was a part of me, a grieving, tired, 67-year-old part of me, that wanted to simply call Gregory and say, "Son, do you know who you married? Do you know what is happening in your own house?" But I also knew that if I did that before I had everything in place, Pamela would have time to delete, deflect, and reframe. She was organized. She had already been 3 steps ahead of me for months, If I was going to stop this, I could not flinch. I called my attorney, a woman named Carol Briggs, who had handled my estate planning and the trust structure. I told her what I had found. She told me to bring everything to her office the following morning. While I was sitting in Carol's office going through the vendor emails and the partnership records, my phone showed a notification I had set up through my business banking system. Someone had initiated a transfer request from the Mercer Group operating account. The amount was $240,000. The destination account was one I did not recognize. The transfer required my authorization code to complete. I did not authorize it. I showed Carol the notification. She looked at it and said, quietly, "Walt, this is no longer just a civil matter." She was right. What Pamela had done, attempting to move funds from a business account without authorization, while simultaneously pursuing a legal transfer document to strip me of control, crossed into territory that was not simply aggressive estate planning. Carol contacted a colleague in white-collar law that same afternoon. Here is what I want you to understand. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from discovering that someone you welcomed into your family was never really there. Gregory had not known the full extent of what Pamela was doing, I believe that. I believe my son was being managed, kept comfortable with half-truths and reassurances, told that this was all for his father's benefit, that the old man needed help, that the business was too much for a widower with a heart condition. I believe Gregory had been made to feel that questioning his wife on this was somehow disloyal to her. She was skilled at that kind of management. But I also knew that Gregory had stood in my kitchen and watched her push that folder across the table without saying a single word. And that was a choice he had made. I did not contact Gregory. Not yet. I needed one more piece. Dennis spent the following week quietly, carefully gathering information from two of our longest-standing employees who had noticed Pamela accessing files she had no operational reason to access. Not stealing. Not yet. But reviewing. Preparing. She had looked at vendor contracts, lease terms, equipment valuations. She was building a picture of what the company was worth for someone who intended to sell it. Meanwhile, I did something Pamela had not anticipated. I called the owners of the 3 neighboring businesses who leased space in the same strip development as our Morristown location, one of our highest revenue stores. I told them I was considering a long-term lease restructuring and wanted their input. What I was actually doing was making sure that any potential sale of that location would run into complications she hadn't accounted for. I also placed a formal hold on the business entity's name and trademark through the state, a procedural step that would require my direct involvement to remove. I was building a wall she didn't know existed. 3 weeks later, Pamela called and asked if I had reviewed the document. She was patient, pleasant, expressed concern about my health. I told her I was still reviewing it with Carol. She said to take all the time I needed. 4 days after that call, I invited Gregory and Pamela to dinner. Not at a restaurant, at my house. I cooked Margaret's chicken and dumplings, the original recipe, the one I had made 100 times in that kitchen. I set the table the way Margaret always set it, with the good plates. When they arrived, Carol was already there. So was Dennis. And so was a gentleman named Howard Park, who was Carol's contact in white-collar law, and who had spent the past 3 weeks reviewing everything we had gathered. Pamela saw the 3 of them seated at my dining room table and stopped walking. Her expression did not break. She was too controlled for that, but something shifted behind her eyes. A recalculation. Gregory looked confused. He looked at me. "Dad, what is this?" I told him to sit down. I told him I loved him. And then I told him I needed him to hear some things. What followed was not a confrontation in the way you might imagine. No screaming, no slamming of hands on tables. Carol walked through the document Pamela had drafted and what it would have actually done. Howard explained the attempted transfer and what it constituted legally. Dennis laid out the partnership history with David Kress, the emails, the acquisition pattern. Pamela tried twice to interrupt with explanations. Howard politely asked her to allow him to finish. Gregory did not look at his wife for a long time. He looked at the table. He looked at his hands. At one point, he looked at the photograph of his mother that I keep on the sideboard, the one from our 25th anniversary, where she is laughing at something I said off camera. When Howard finished, the room was very quiet. Gregory said, "Pamela, is this true?" She started to say that it was being mischaracterized, that she had been trying to protect the family, that David was a professional contact, not a partner, that the transfer was an accounting error. Each sentence came out measured and rehearsed, and with each one, I watched my son's face change in a way I had never seen before. Not anger, something more painful than anger. Recognition. He stood up. He asked Pamela to go wait in the car. She did not move for a moment. Then she picked up her purse and walked out of my house. Gregory stood in my dining room for a long time after the door closed. I did not rush him. Finally, he said, "I didn't know about Cress. I want you to know that." I told him I believed him. He said, "I knew she thought you should step back. I thought I told myself it was because she was worried about you. After your heart thing." I told him I understood how that could feel like concern when you loved someone. He sat back down. He looked at the chicken and dumplings that had gone cold in the serving dish. He said, "Mom's recipe?" I told him yes. We stayed at that table until past 10 o'clock. Howard outlined what the next steps would look like from a legal standpoint. Carol confirmed that my ownership structure was intact and that the attempted transfer had been flagged with the banking institution. Dennis said almost nothing. The entire evening, he just refilled everyone's coffee when it ran low, which was the most Dennis thing he could possibly have done. What happened in the months that followed, I will tell you plainly. Pamela retained her own attorney. The matter was resolved through a legal process that I am not going to detail fully here, but the outcome was that her access to all Mercer Group accounts and files was permanently revoked. The transfer attempt was documented and addressed with the banking institution, and the partnership history with David Cress became part of that record. She and Gregory separated. That was Gregory's decision, made on his own, and I have never told him what to do about his marriage. I only told him I would be here either way. Gregory now works at the Kingsport location 4 days a week. He asked if he could, and I said yes. He is learning the business the right way from the floor, from the kitchen, from the people who have been there for decades. He has Margaret's instinct for people when he is not letting someone else tell him how to see them. I think she would be glad to know that. Dennis received full co-ownership of the Kingsport store, as the trust had always specified. He knows every person by name. He has their mothers' names memorized. He is the best thing that ever happened to that building, and he was for a long time before any of this. I am still here. I am at the original Kingsport location every Tuesday and Thursday morning when the biscuits come out of the oven at 7:15. I drink my coffee at the counter. I talk to anyone who wants to talk. The walls are still warm yellow. The booths are still clean. And near the register, Margaret is still laughing at something I said off camera 25 years ago, when we did not yet know everything that was coming, but we had already built something that no folder pushed across a table could take away. I want to say one thing before I close, friends, because I think it is the part that matters most. There is a kind of grief that other people see as vulnerability, and sometimes the people who love you most, or who want you to believe they love you, will use that grief as a doorway. They will frame their own ambitions as your protection. They will call their acquisition your relief. They will sit in your late wife's chair and tell you that signing away everything she helped you build is the sensible thing to do. You do not have to be angry to resist that. You do not have to be loud. You just have to know what you built, know who helped you build it, and refuse to let someone else's urgency become your decision. Margaret used to say that a full restaurant on a Tuesday morning means you're doing something right because nobody is obligated to be there on a Tuesday morning. They chose you. They came back. 11 locations, 38 years. Every Tuesday morning, they keep coming back.